One elderly farmer's final attempt to save his family's century-old heritage seed farm from foreclosure unexpectedly uncovers a massive government conspiracy involving classified agricultural research, suppressed climate science, and national food security, all brought crashing down when the president's motorcade arrives at his remote property, carrying evidence that would not only save his farm, but reveal a covert national security initiative hidden from the American public for over 30 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog still clung to the rolling hills as Harold Winters parked his weathered pickup truck in the nearly empty lot of First Regional Bank of Millfield. At 73, the silver-haired farmer had spent every day of his adult life cultivating the 250-acre heritage seed farm that his grandfather had established in 1907. Now, with foreclosure notices piled on his kitchen table and just $742 left in his checking account, he faced the unthinkable, watching 5 generations of agricultural history disappear beneath the bulldozers of corporate development. "Got the financial statements, Dad?" asked Sophia, his 35-year-old daughter, who had reluctantly left her position as an agricultural geneticist at the university to help save the failing farm. Her return 6 months ago had brought innovative ideas, but they had come too late to reverse years of declining profits, mounting medical bills from Harold's wife's long battle with cancer and the catastrophic drought that had devastated their region for 3 consecutive growing seasons. Harold patted his worn leather satchel containing neatly organized folders. "Everything's here, though I doubt it'll make much difference. Jenkins has had his mind made up since we walked through the door." Bank manager Richard Jenkins had already rejected their loan application twice, despite the farm's unique collection of over 600 heirloom seed varieties that had been preserved through the family's meticulous care for generations. The old farmer straightened his shoulders as they pushed through the heavy glass doors of the modernized bank building. The original brick facade remained, but the interior had been transformed into a sleek, corporate space that felt foreign. To Harold, the family-owned institution where his father had secured loans with a handshake had been acquired by Nationwide Financial 3 years earlier, bringing new policies that prioritize short-term profits over community relationships. "Mr. Winters," called the receptionist, her voice professionally pleasant but distant, "Mr. Jenkins will see you now." She gestured toward the office at the end of the corridor, where the bank manager waited, his expression already communicating the inevitable rejection. Harold and Sophia settled into the uncomfortable chairs facing Jenkins' imposing desk. The bank manager barely looked up from his computer screen as he began reviewing their application with practiced detachment. "Mr. Winters, I've examined your proposal carefully, but I'm afraid the bank's position remains unchanged. Your property doesn't meet our current lending criteria." Jenkins slid the application back across the desk, the red "Denied" stamp painfully visible in the upper corner. The consistent negative cash flow over the past 3 years, combined with the drought forecast for the coming season, makes this an unacceptable risk for our institution. Harold leaned forward, his weathered hands steady despite the desperation he felt. "Mr. Jenkins, this isn't just about cash flow. Our seed bank contains varieties that don't exist anywhere else in the country, agricultural genetics that could be crucial for developing drought-resistant crops. The research potential alone—" "I understand your attachment to the property," Jenkins interrupted, his tone suggesting he understood nothing of the kind. "But Nationwide requires data-driven decisions, not speculative research value. The land itself is worth considerably more for development than agricultural use, particularly given its proximity to the proposed interstate expansion." Sophia produced a folder from her bag, We've secured preliminary commitments from 3 university agricultural departments interested in our heritage seed collection. She placed the letters on Jenkins's desk. They're prepared to fund a collaborative research program that would generate sustainable revenue within 18 months. Jenkins glanced at the documents without picking them up. Future academic collaborations aren't sufficient collateral for a commercial loan of this size, Dr. Winters. Besides, Nationwide has existing partnerships with industrial agriculture, clients who have their own research priorities. The implication hung in the air: powerful interests preferred that the Winters' rare seed varieties be absorbed into corporate genetic libraries rather than remain independently managed. Harold had declined multiple buyout offers from Conagra Genetics, offers that had become progressively less generous as his financial situation deteriorated. "We're only asking for enough to restructure our existing debt and upgrade our irrigation system," Harold said, fighting to keep frustration from his voice. "The farm has survived 2 world wars, the Dust Bowl, and the farm crisis of the 80s. Surely that demonstrates resilience worth supporting." Jenkins closed the folder with finality. "Mr. Winters, the banking landscape has changed. Historical performance isn't predictive in today's climate models. Your property has been classified as high-risk agricultural land according to our environmental assessment metrics." He slid a business card across the desk. "I would strongly suggest you consider Carson Development Group's standing offer before foreclosure proceedings advance further. They're prepared to close quickly, and their terms are more generous than you're likely to find elsewhere." Harold stared at the card without touching it. Carson Development, the same company that had transformed 3 neighboring family farms into a sprawling warehouse and distribution center that now dominated the valley's eastern approach. The same company whose water usage had further depleted the region's struggling aquifer, accelerating the environmental challenges facing remaining agricultural operations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 200 years of agricultural knowledge, Harold said quietly. 600 seed varieties, many that don't exist in any corporate or government seed bank, all to be paved over for another distribution center. Jenkins's expression revealed momentary discomfort before his professional mask returned. "I understand this is difficult, but my hands are tied by institutional policies. Perhaps the university could preserve some of your seed collection. At least that aspect of your family's legacy might continue." As they left the bank, Harold's normally stoic demeanor showed cracks of genuine despair. The impending loss wasn't just financial, it represented the erasure of generations of agricultural knowledge and genetic diversity painstakingly preserved by his family. "We still have options, Dad," Sophia said as they walked toward the truck, though her tone lacked conviction. They had already explored every conventional financing avenue, reaching identical dead ends. Their last hope had been Jenkins, who had known Harold for decades before the bank's acquisition. Harold nodded absently, his gaze drawn to a black SUV with government plates parked across the street. 2 men in dark suits watched them with peculiar intensity, speaking into their wrist microphones as Harold and Sophia approached their truck. "Federal agents?" Sophia whispered, following her father's gaze. "What would they want in Millfield?" Harold shrugged, too preoccupied with their financial crisis to wonder about government business in their small rural community. As they drove back toward the farm, neither noticed the SUV pull out behind them, maintaining a discreet distance as they wound through the country roads. The Winters' heritage farm spread across rolling hills that had once been considered marginal land, too rocky for conventional farming when Harold's grandfather had purchased it for a pittance in 1907. What the property lacked in premium soil, it made up for in microclimates, varied elevations, slopes and natural windbreaks that created perfect conditions for seed cultivation and preservation. Harold parked near the century-old barn that housed their seed processing equipment. Despite financial constraints, the building was meticulously maintained, its climate-controlled storage rooms protecting the farm's true treasure. Thousands of carefully catalogued seed varieties, many developed and maintained exclusively by the Winters family across 5 generations. "I didn't want to say anything at the bank," Sophia began as they walked toward the farmhouse, "but I received a strange call last night from someone at the Department of Agriculture. They were asking very specific questions about our drought-hardy red wheat variety, the one Grandpa developed during the 1950s drought." Harold stopped walking. "What kind of questions?" "Technical ones, germination rates under varying soil salinity, genetic drift observations over multiple generations, drought threshold measurements." The caller knew details about our cultivation, methods that aren't documented anywhere public. Before Harold could respond, the distant sound of helicopter rotors drew their attention to the horizon. 2 military helicopters approached from the east, banking sharply as they reached the farm's perimeter. "What in the world?" Harold muttered, shading his eyes against the morning sun. The helicopters circled once before landing in the fallow field beyond the equipment barn. Moments later, the distinctive sound of a motorcade reached them. Multiple vehicles approaching, rapidly along the private farm road that connected to the county highway. "Dad, that's Secret Service," Sophia gasped as the lead vehicles came into view. The black SUVs with government plates formed a protective perimeter, agents emerging with practiced efficiency to secure the area. Behind them, the unmistakable presidential limousine rolled to a stop in front of the weathered farmhouse. Harold Winters, who had faced drought, flood, and financial ruin with stoic dignity, found himself momentarily speechless as the President of the United States stepped from the armored vehicle and approached them with purposeful strides. "Mr. Winters," called President Eleanor Casworth, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but matters of national security sometimes require discretion. Your drought-hardy red wheat may be the key to averting a crisis that's been building for decades. We have much to discuss." As Secret Service agents established a security perimeter around the farm, Harold and Sophia exchanged bewildered glances. The elderly farmer who had left the bank defeated and hopeless just an hour earlier now found himself welcoming the most powerful person in the world onto the land his family had nurtured for generations. What Harold couldn't possibly know as he led the presidential entourage toward his modest farmhouse was that the heritage seeds his family had preserved through wars, economic depressions, and environmental challenges were about to become the centerpiece of a classified government initiative that would transform agricultural policy worldwide. The elderly farmer, denied a simple bank loan that morning, was about to learn that his family's century of careful stewardship had produced something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. Genetic keys to food security in an increasingly unstable climate. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, where 5 generations of Winters had gathered around the same oak table, Harold and Sophia found themselves seated with President Casworth and 3 individuals introduced as the Secretary of Agriculture, the National Security Advisor, and the Director of the newly established Climate Resilience Agency. "Mr. Winters," the President began once everyone was settled, "I understand you met with your bank this morning regarding foreclosure proceedings. I assure you, by the time our conversation concludes, those financial concerns will be addressed. But first, we need to discuss something of far greater significance." She nodded to a staff member who placed a secure tablet on the table, displaying classified satellite imagery of massive crop failures across multiple continents. "What you're seeing is real-time agricultural data that isn't public," the President continued, Global crop viability has decreased by 37% over the past decade due to accelerating climate instability. Our leading environmental scientists project a critical threshold will be crossed within 5 years, potentially triggering widespread food shortages unlike anything seen in modern history. The National Security Advisor, Dr. Martin Chen, leaned forward. Mr. Winters, for the past 30 years, a classified program called Operation Seedkeeper has been quietly tracking and evaluating heritage seed stocks that might contain genetic traits capable of withstanding extreme climate conditions. Your family's work has been on our radar since the program's inception. Harold's expression revealed growing confusion. If our seed stock is so valuable, why has every government agricultural program pushed us toward commercial varieties for decades? Why have heritage seed farmers been systematically driven out of business by policies favoring industrial agriculture? The president exchanged glances with her advisors before responding. A fair question that deserves a candid answer. Policy fragmentation between administrations led to contradictory approaches. While some agencies recognize the value of genetic diversity, others prioritize short-term productivity gains through industrial standardization. Secretary of Agriculture Diana Williams added, "The classified nature of Operation Seedkeeper meant that public agricultural policy couldn't openly prioritize heritage seed preservation without revealing national security concerns about long-term climate projections. It created a destructive disconnection between public policy and classified contingency planning." Harold processed this information slowly, decades of frustration giving way to disbelief. So, while official policy pushed farmers like me to the brink of bankruptcy, a secret program was documenting the value of what we were fighting to preserve. Unfortunately, yes, the president acknowledged. This administration is working to reconcile these contradictions, but we're racing against accelerating climate timelines. Which brings us to the immediate matter, your drought-hardy red wheat variety and several others uniquely developed by your family. Dr. Chen activated a secure presentation on the tablet. Our analysis suggests that specific genetic traits in your drought-hardy red wheat could be crucial for developing climate-resilient food sources. Unlike commercial varieties that require consistent conditions and chemical inputs, your family's wheat has demonstrated remarkable adaptability to extreme weather fluctuations. Sophia studied the technical data with her geneticist's eye. These are drought simulation models far more severe than anything currently public. You're preparing for conditions well beyond what mainstream climate science acknowledges. Correct, confirmed Dr. Isabella Martinez, director of the Climate Resilience Agency. Public projections remain conservative to avoid economic panic, but our classified models indicate more rapid deterioration of agricultural conditions. We are particularly interested in how your family achieved drought resistance without sacrificing nutritional density, something corporate seed programs haven't accomplished despite billions in research funding. Harold sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the surreal contrast between the morning's bank rejection and the current conversation. All this interest is flattering, but it doesn't change the fact that we're weeks away from losing everything to foreclosure. Carson Development has already surveyed the property for their warehouse project. President Casworth smiled for the first time. That's actually not accurate, Mr. Winters. As of this morning, Carson Development's permits have been suspended pending environmental impact review, and Nationwide Bank is currently responding to a federal banking examination focused on potential improper relationships between lending officers and development interests. The president slid a folder across the table. This contains a formal offer from the Climate Resilience Agency to establish your farm as the cornerstone of a new national heritage seed preservation network. Full ownership would remain with your family, with substantial federal funding for expanded operations. In exchange, you'd provide research access and collaborate on propagation of key varieties. Harold opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning terms that would not only eliminate their debt, but provide generational security for the farm's continued operation under family control. The financial figures made his recent loan request seem trivial by comparison. "Why now?" he asked, looking directly at the president. "If you've known about our seed stock for decades, why wait until we're on the brink of losing everything?" Dr. Martinez answered with unexpected candor. "Bureaucratic failure, Mr. Winters. Operation Seedkeeper was compartmentalized across multiple agencies, creating information silos. Your farm's foreclosure status was flagged in our system just 3 days ago when cross-referencing revealed the potential loss of genetic resources classified as critical to national security. The system failed you," the president acknowledged, "and many others like you. Part of our mission now is correcting that failure before we lose irreplaceable agricultural heritage. Your family preserved something precious when government policies actively worked against you. We're here to ensure that wisdom isn't lost." As the meeting continued into the afternoon, Harold and Sophia learned the true scope of what was being proposed. The Winters Heritage Farm would become the administrative hub for a nationwide network of heritage seed producers, with advanced research facilities constructed on the property and educational programs established to train a new generation in traditional seed-saving techniques. While government vehicles continued arriving throughout the day, bringing equipment and personnel to secure the property, Harold walked alone to the hillside where 5 generations of his family were buried, in a small, well-tended cemetery. Standing before his grandfather's weathered headstone, he tried to process the day's extraordinary reversal of fortune. "You were right all along," Harold whispered to his grandfather's memory. "You always said these seeds were our true legacy, more valuable than gold in the right circumstances." He placed a hand on the sun-warmed stone. "I almost failed you, almost lost everything you and Dad built." As sunset painted the rolling hills in golden light, Harold returned to the farmhouse where Sophia was reviewing contract details with government attorneys. The kitchen now functioned as an impromptu command center, with secure communications equipment established and security personnel positioned throughout the property. "Is it really happening, Dad?" Sophia asked quietly when they finally had a moment alone. "After years of rejection and struggle, suddenly we're vital to national security." Harold nodded, still processing the whirlwind transformation. "Apparently, we've been important all along. The government just couldn't tell us without revealing classified climate projections." He gazed out the window at the presidential motorcade and military helicopters on his property. Quite a change from being denied a simple bank loan this morning. What Harold Winters couldn't know, as he signed the historic partnership agreement that evening, was that his family's century of careful seed preservation would soon be recognized as one of the most significant contributions to agricultural security in American history. The elderly farmer who had entered the bank, defeated, and emerged to find the president's motorcade on his property, was about to become the unlikely catalyst for a fundamental reconsideration of how nations approach agricultural heritage and food security in an increasingly unstable climate. The farm that had faced imminent foreclosure would instead become the cornerstone of a new national initiative connecting traditional agricultural wisdom with cutting-edge science, all because one family had stubbornly preserved genetic diversity, when industrial standardization seemed the only path forward. As security teams established overnight positions around the Winters farm, protecting seed varieties suddenly classified as strategic national resources, Harold allowed himself to believe that his family's agricultural legacy would now continue. for generations to come. The following morning dawned with an unprecedented scene at Winter's Heritage Farm. Secret Service agents patrolling the perimeter, satellite communications equipment established on the south lawn, and a military helicopter maintaining position overhead. For the local residents of Millfield who drove past, the sudden government presence at a struggling farm sparked intense curiosity and speculation. Harold stood at his kitchen window, watching as agricultural scientists carefully collected seed samples from the climate-controlled storage facility his grandfather had built into the hillside nearly a century ago. Each heritage variety was being documented, photographed, and secured in specialized containers for genetic analysis at federal research facilities. "Mr. Winters," called Dr. Martinez, entering the kitchen with a tablet displaying real-time security footage. "We've identified several vehicles conducting surveillance of your property from the county road. Local news vans, but also representatives from Carson Development, a nationwide bank." Harold nodded without surprise. Word travels fast in small communities. By noon, half the county will know something extraordinary is happening here, even if they don't understand what or why. President Casworth had departed late the previous night after establishing a comprehensive security protocol for the farm and its invaluable seed collection. The operation now unfolding was led by Dr. Martinez, whose Climate Resilience Agency team worked with practiced efficiency despite the program's recent formal establishment. "Dad!" Sophia burst through the door, her expression animated with excitement. "You need to see this." She led Harold to the main barn, where government technicians had set up advanced imaging equipment to analyze seed morphology without destructive testing. On high-resolution screens, the unique cellular structures of drought-hardy red wheat appeared in extraordinary detail, revealing characteristics that had previously remained hidden. Side-by-side comparisons with commercial wheat varieties highlighted dramatic differences in root structure, water retention capabilities, and cellular resilience under stress conditions. "Your family's selective breeding created something remarkable," explained Dr. Eliza Kaplan, the team's lead geneticist. "This isn't just drought resistance, it's a fundamentally different approach to environmental adaptation. The plant anticipates stress rather than simply responding to it." Harold studied the images with growing amazement. "My grandfather always said he was breeding for intuition, not just traits. We thought it was just an old farmer's superstition." "Not superstition at all," Dr. Kaplan replied. "He was recognizing something science is only beginning to understand: plants' ability to modify gene expression in anticipation of environmental changes. Your family somehow accelerated and directed this capability through traditional breeding methods, achieving results that billion-dollar corporate labs haven't matched with advanced genetic engineering." As Harold absorbed this information, Dr. Martinez approached with a satellite phone. "Mr. Winters, we've intercepted communications indicating that Carson Development executives are meeting with their attorneys to challenge our presence here. They're claiming their development agreement gives them legal priority over federal intervention." Harold's momentary elation faded. "They've invested millions in planning their warehouse complex. They won't walk away without a fight." "Which is precisely why we need to understand exactly what happened with your bank loan applications," Dr. Martinez replied. "The timing and circumstances suggest potential impropriety. Would you be willing to review the full history with our financial investigators?" Over the next several hours, Harold and Sophia meticulously reconstructed 5 years of increasingly desperate financial maneuvers to save the farm. Loan applications with contradictory rejections, land value assessments that inexplicably decreased for loan purposes but increased for tax valuations, and Carson Development's progressively aggressive acquisition attempts that always seemed synchronized with bank decisions. "The pattern is unmistakable," concluded Special Agent Rebecca Torres, the Treasury Department investigator assigned to the case. "Nationwide systematically undermined your financing options while simultaneously facilitating Carson's acquisition strategy. The question is whether this represents standard predatory business practice or something more concerning." Harold spread decades of financial records across the dining room table. "Everything changed 3 years ago when we declined Carson's first purchase offer. Before that, our relationship with the bank was challenging but functional. After we refused to sell, even modest operational loans became impossible to secure." Agent Torres nodded thoughtfully. "Coincidentally, 3 years ago is when Carson Development received its first major contract for distribution centers supporting military supply chains, projects requiring extensive security clearances and background checks." She tapped notes into her secure tablet. "I need to cross-reference some information with our national security database." As she stepped outside to make secure calls, Sophia turned to her father. "Do you think there's actually a connection between our seed varieties and Carson's sudden interest in our specific property? They could build warehouses anywhere in the county." Before Harold could respond, commotion at the farm's entrance gate drew their attention. Several black SUVs had arrived, but unlike the government vehicles already present, these carried corporate logos. Richard Jenkins from Nationwide Bank emerged from the lead vehicle, accompanied by William Carson himself, the rarely seen founder of Carson Development. Dr. Martinez intercepted the visitors at the security perimeter. Her conversation, visible but not audible from the farmhouse. The discussion quickly grew animated, with Carson gesturing emphatically toward the farm buildings, while Jenkins repeatedly consulted documents from his briefcase. After several tense minutes, the corporate representatives returned to their vehicles and departed, Carson's expression visibly thunderous even from a distance. Dr. Martinez walked briskly back to the farmhouse, her typically composed demeanor showing signs of concern. "That was illuminating," she reported as she joined Harold and Sophia. "Mr. Carson presented what he claims is an executed purchase agreement for your property, signed 3 days ago and notarized by a bank employee. According to this document, you accepted their final offer and agreed to vacate within 30 days. Harold stood abruptly. "That's absolutely false. We never signed anything." "Obviously," Dr. Martinez agreed. "The document is a crude forgery that wouldn't withstand basic forensic examination. What's interesting is their willingness to present it to federal officials, suggesting either extraordinary arrogance or genuine panic." Agent Torres returned from her secure call, her expression grave. "We have a situation that extends well beyond predatory lending. Carson Development's recent warehouse facilities contain sophisticated climate-controlled storage sections that don't appear in any official blueprints. Sections with specifications remarkably similar to seed preservation requirements." The implications settled heavily in the room. "You're suggesting they wanted our land specifically to access our seed vault?" Sophia asked incredulously. "Not just access, eliminate competition," Agent Torres clarified. "Our working theory is that Carson recognized the strategic value of climate-resilient seed stock before most of the agricultural sector. They've been systematically acquiring properties with heritage seed operations, incorporating the genetic resources into their own proprietary collections, then eliminating the original sources through development." Harold sank back into his chair, the full picture finally becoming clear. The interstate expansion announcement that devalued our property for agricultural use but made it perfect for warehousing, that was never coincidental, was it? Preliminary evidence suggests the routing was influenced by Carson's connections within the State Transportation Department, Agent Torres confirmed. Creating economic pressure on precisely targeted agricultural properties appears to be their established pattern. As this revelation settled, a secure video call from Washington interrupted their discussion. President Casworth appeared on screen, flanked by her national security team and the Attorney General. "Mr. Winters," the president began, "we've uncovered disturbing information about Carson Development's operations. Their interest in your property wasn't simply opportunistic. It was part of a coordinated strategy to privatize crucial genetic resources ahead of projected climate disruptions. The Attorney General has authorized immediate action to secure all evidence and prevent any potential destruction of records." On the President's command, a coordinated operation launched across multiple states, federal agents simultaneously, serving warrants at Carson Development headquarters, Nationwide Bank's corporate offices, and several state transportation departments, where routing decisions had suspiciously aligned with Carson's acquisition targets. This extends beyond corporate overreach into potential national security concerns, the President continued. Foreign investment in Carson Development suggests the possible transfer of strategic agricultural resources to overseas entities not aligned with American interests. We believe your family's seed preservation work may have inadvertently disrupted a systematic effort to monopolize climate-resilient food sources. As Harold listened to the President outline the expanding investigation, the day's revelations aligned into a coherent but disturbing picture. His family's stubborn preservation of agricultural heritage, often dismissed as old-fashioned sentimentality, had positioned them at the center of an emerging geopolitical struggle over the future of food security. By mid-afternoon, the farm had transformed into an operations center for what the President had classified as Operation Seed Trust. Military transport planes landed on the straight section of county highway that ran alongside the property, bringing specialized equipment and additional personnel to secure and analyze the seed collection. Amid this controlled chaos, Harold sought a moment of solitude in the small office adjacent to the seed storage facility. The room remained much as his grandfather had designed it, walls lined with handwritten breeding records dating back to 1907, carefully preserved in leather-bound journals that documented weather patterns, crop performances, and breeding selections across generations. Harold ran his fingers along the spines of these irreplaceable records, understanding now that they contained something far more valuable than family history. These meticulously maintained journals detailed a century-long experiment in agricultural resilience conducted without sophisticated equipment or corporate funding, just patient observation and intimate knowledge of the land's rhythms. A gentle knock interrupted his reflections. Dr. Martinez entered, carrying a weathered metal box that Harold immediately recognized from his childhood. "We found this hidden beneath the floorboards in the oldest section of the seed vault," she explained, placing it carefully on the desk. "It was so well concealed our scanning equipment almost missed it." The box bore his grandfather's initials and the date 1943, the height of World War II. Harold opened it with reverent care, revealing dozens of seed packets, each labeled in his grandfather's precise handwriting with geographical origins that spanned continents. Mesopotamian drought-resistant barley, 1942. In North African heat-tolerant wheat, 1939. Russian winter-hardy rye, 1937. Beneath the seed packets lay a leather-bound journal different from the others, its pages filled with correspondence between Harold's grandfather and agricultural scientists from around the world, many from countries that would become adversaries during the war. "My God," Harold whispered. "Grandfather was creating a global seed preservation network during wartime. These varieties, many would have been lost during the conflict." Dr. Martinez nodded solemnly. "Your grandfather appears to have participated," in an international scientific underground that transcended political boundaries to preserve agricultural heritage during global conflict. These letters reference a seed peace initiative involving researchers from 12 countries, all working to safeguard crop diversity against the threat of war. The revelation added profound new dimensions to Harold's understanding of his family legacy. What he had preserved as family tradition had actually been part of a far larger mission, one that his grandfather had kept secret even from his own son. "There's more," Dr. Martinez continued, revealing a sealed envelope addressed to future generations of seed keepers in his grandfather's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Harold broke the wax seal that had remained untouched for over 70 years. The letter inside began with words that sent chills through Harold's body. "If you are reading this, the world has likely reached the climate crisis our scientific community began predicting in the 1930s. The seeds preserved here represent humanity's best hope for agricultural adaptation to the coming changes." Harold read the letter aloud, his voice growing stronger with each prescient paragraph. His grandfather had documented early climate research that wouldn't become mainstream science for decades, connecting with forward-thinking scientists worldwide, who recognized the threat long before public awareness emerged. The letter concluded, "Politics and profit will inevitably complicate humanity's response to changing growing conditions. Nations and corporations will seek to control adaptive agricultural resources. Our mission transcends these boundaries. We are not merely preserving seeds, we are preserving possibility itself. The genetic diversity contained in these humble vaults may determine whether future generations face starvation or sovereignty." As Harold finished reading, the farmhouse erupted with activity. Agent Torres burst into the room, her expression urgent. "We've just received intelligence that Carson Development has initiated document destruction protocols at 3 locations. The Attorney General has authorized immediate raids to secure evidence." Simultaneously, Dr. Kaplan arrived with preliminary genetic analysis results. "Mr. Winters, your drought-hardy red wheat contains adaptive traits we've never documented in any commercial variety. Early projections suggest it could maintain 78% yield under conditions that would cause complete crop failure in standard varieties. If these results hold true across your other heritage lines, your seed vault may represent the most important agricultural resource in the country." The convergence of past and present, his grandfather's visionary work and the modern climate crisis, created a moment of profound clarity for Harold. His family hadn't simply been stubborn farmers clinging to outdated methods. They had been custodians of a mission spanning generations, preserving biological resources whose true value would only become apparent when the world most desperately needed them. As evening approached, President Casworth reconnected via secure video, her expressions simultaneously grave and determined. "Mr. Winters, today's developments have elevated Operation Seed Trust to our highest national security priority. The attempted corporate capture of climate-resilient seed stocks represents a threat to food sovereignty that transcends normal economic competition." The President outlined immediate actions: emergency protective status for all remaining heritage seed farms nationwide, a comprehensive audit of agricultural genetics that had already been privatized, and the establishment of a national seed security reserve with the Winters Farm as its centerpiece. "We've operated on the naive assumption that market forces would naturally preserve essential agricultural diversity," the President acknowledged. "That assumption has nearly cost us the very resources we'll need to survive what's coming. Your family's preservation work, once dismissed as obsolete, now represents a cornerstone of national resilience strategy." As the video conference concluded, Harold stepped onto the porch where his family had gathered for generations to watch the sunset over their fields. The farm that had appeared worthless to bankers and valuable only for development to corporations now buzzed with activity as scientists, security personnel, and government officials worked urgently to document and protect its true treasures. Sophia joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Pretty dramatic reversal from this morning's bank rejection," she observed with understated humor. "Yesterday we couldn't get a simple operating loan. Today the president calls our seeds vital to national security." Harold smiled faintly. "Your grandfather always said that value and price rarely align in times of confusion. The market completely mispriced what we have here because it was measuring against the wrong time frame." As darkness settled over the farm, the full security perimeter became visible. Floodlights illuminating the fence line, guards at regular intervals, and surveillance drones maintaining constant aerial observation. The measures seemed surreal, surrounding a humble seed farm that had nearly been foreclosed upon that very morning. What Harold Winters couldn't fully comprehend, as he surveyed this extraordinary transformation, was how his family's century of careful stewardship would soon be recognized as one of the most significant contributions to agricultural security. In modern history, the elderly farmer, denied a simple bank loan that morning, was now at the center of a national security operation that would fundamentally reshape how civilization prepared for climate adaptation. The seeds that financial institutions had deemed worthless would soon be recognized as priceless, irreplaceable genetic resources developed through generations of careful selection that could make the difference between global famine and food resilience in the increasingly unstable decades ahead. All because one family had stubbornly preserved agricultural heritage when every economic incentive pushed toward standardization and surrender to industrial methods. As Harold prepared to review security protocols with Dr. Martinez, his phone rang with a local number he immediately recognized. Richard Jenkins from Nationwide Bank, the same man who had denied his loan application hours earlier. "Mr. Winters," Jenkins began, his typically confident voice now uncharacteristically hesitant. "In light of new information, the bank would like to reconsider your loan application. We believe there may have been irregularities in our initial assessment of your property's value and the viability of your operation." Harold listened silently, allowing the banker's uncomfortable backpedaling to unfold without interruption. "We are prepared to offer highly favorable terms," Jenkins continued, when met with silence. "The regional president is personally reviewing your file and believes your agricultural preservation work represents exactly the kind of community stewardship our institution was founded to support." After a measured pause, Harold responded, with the quiet dignity that had carried him through decades of struggle. "Mr. Jenkins, I appreciate your reconsideration. However, it appears my farm's financial situation has resolved itself through other channels. Please direct any further communications to the Treasury Department investigators who will be auditing your loan decision processes tomorrow morning." As he ended the call, Harold exchanged knowing glances with Sophia. The bank's sudden reversal couldn't have been more transparent. A desperate attempt to distance itself from Carson Development's increasingly suspicious activities now that federal investigations had begun. Funny how quickly our unacceptable risk profile improved once. "The president's motorcade showed up," Sophia observed dryly. Harold nodded, gazing out at the fields his family had tended for 5 generations. "Markets are remarkably efficient at recalculating value once all information becomes visible. We were never poor stewards, just rich in resources the financial world wasn't measuring yet." The elderly farmer who had walked into a bank defeated that morning and emerged to find the president's motorcade on his property was beginning to understand that his family's stubborn preservation of agricultural diversity would soon be recognized, not as quaint tradition, but as visionary foresight that might help secure humanity's food future in increasingly uncertain times. 3 days after the president's unexpected arrival at Winter's Heritage Farm, the property had transformed beyond recognition. Military-grade security fencing now surrounded the perimeter, advanced agricultural research equipment filled the barns, and a temporary command center occupied what had once been the equipment shed. Government vehicles continuously arrived and departed, bringing specialists from disciplines ranging from genetics to climatology to national security. Harold stood in the center of his wheat field, the same field he had feared would be bulldozed for development, watching as teams of scientists carefully collected soil samples and documented microclimatic conditions. His grandfather's weathered journal lay open in his hands, the prescient observations from 1943 providing uncanny context for the modern crisis unfolding around him. Mr. Winters called Dr. Kaplan, the lead geneticist, hurrying across the field with tablet in hand. "We've completed the first comprehensive analysis of your drought-hardy red wheat genetics. The results are, well, revolutionary isn't an exaggeration." She displayed complex genetic sequencing data alongside comparative charts showing resilience thresholds for standard wheat varieties versus the Winter's Heritage strain. The differences weren't incremental, they were transformative. "Your family's wheat contains genetic adaptations we've never documented in commercially available varieties," Dr. Kaplan explained, her professional composure barely containing her excitement. "Under simulated conditions representing projected climate scenarios for 2040, commercial wheat fails completely, while your variety maintains nearly 80% yield capacity." Harold studied the data with growing amazement. "My grandfather would document which plants remained strongest during drought. Years, saving seeds only from those that performed well without irrigation. He called it listening to what the land was trying to tell us." "That listening created something remarkable," Dr. Kaplan replied. "Your family essentially guided natural selection toward climate resilience long before modern science recognized the need. What's most extraordinary is that you achieved this while maintaining nutritional density. Commercial breeding programs have consistently sacrificed nutritional quality for yield and uniformity." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a government helicopter. Dr. Martinez emerged accompanied by Attorney General Eleanor Simmons, whose presence signaled the escalating seriousness of the investigation into Carson development. And Nationwide Bank. "Mr. Winters," the Attorney General greeted him with a firm handshake. "We've uncovered evidence that transforms our understanding of what's been happening with your farm and others like it. I believe you deserve to hear this directly." In the farmhouse kitchen, now functioning as a secure briefing room, the Attorney General spread documents across the table where 5 generations of the Winters family had shared meals. The papers revealed a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. "Carson Development isn't simply a real estate company with predatory practices," Attorney General Simmons began. "Evidence seized from their headquarters reveals it's a front for Nexus Agricultural Holdings, a conglomerate controlled by foreign interests systematically acquiring climate-resilient genetic resources worldwide." She displayed internal corporate documents outlining Operation Harvest, a global strategy to identify, acquire, and control agricultural properties with unique genetic resources that showed promise for climate adaptation. They, specifically, targeted family farms with multi-generational breeding programs, the Attorney General continued. "Their acquisition pattern precisely tracks properties with heritage seed operations that had developed region-specific climate resilience. Once acquired, the genetic material was transferred to secure facilities, and the original farms were converted to commercial use, effectively erasing the source of the adaptation. Harold's expression darkened as the implications became clear. They weren't just after our land. They wanted to erase the evidence that these varieties existed independently before they claimed to have developed them. Precisely, confirmed the Attorney General. We've discovered patent applications filed by Nexus subsidiaries for genetic traits nearly identical to those in your heritage varieties. They were positioning to control climate-adaptive agriculture through intellectual property rights, creating a monopoly on food security in increasingly unstable conditions. Dr. Martinez added, Nationwide Bank wasn't simply making poor lending decisions. Their loan officers received specific direction to accelerate foreclosures on targeted properties while simultaneously facilitating Carson's acquisitions. The coordination was systematic and deliberate. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of corporate espionage, regulatory capture, and strategic elimination of agricultural heritage that might challenge emerging patent monopolies. Carson Development had constructed its warehouse network not primarily for distribution, but to house state-of-the-art seed banking facilities where appropriated genetic resources could be preserved, studied, and eventually commercialized under proprietary control. The most alarming aspect, Dr. Martinez noted, is how close they came to succeeding. Of the 16 heritage seed farms on their acquisition list, your property is one of only 3 that hadn't already been converted to commercial use. The genetic diversity developed through generations of careful stewardship was being systematically privatized without public awareness. As Harold absorbed these revelations, Sophia entered with urgent news. The preliminary injunction against Carson has been granted. Federal marshals are securing all their seed storage facilities nationwide, and their assets have been frozen pending investigation. The Attorney General nodded with grim satisfaction. We've also detained William Carson and 3 nationwide bank executives on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted theft of strategic national resources. The investigation continues to expand as we follow financial connections to overseas entities. Harold stood and walked to the window, gazing. Across fields his family had stewarded for generations. All those years we struggled to keep this place going, watching neighboring farms fold one by one. We never imagined we were targets in a global resource grab. Few people recognized what was at stake, Dr. Martinez said quietly. Climate-adaptive genetics developed through traditional breeding methods represent perhaps the most valuable agricultural resource of our time, more precious than land itself as growing conditions become increasingly unpredictable. The farmhouse door opened as President Casworth arrived for a scheduled briefing, her expression resolute as she surveyed the gathered experts and the evidence spread across the table. Mr. Winters, she began, I've just come from an emergency National Security Council meeting. Based on evidence secured over the past 72 hours, I've authorized the establishment of the National Agricultural Genetic Heritage Reserve, with your farm designated as its first protected site. She handed Harold an executive order bearing the presidential seal. This classification places your property and its genetic resources under permanent federal protection while maintaining your family's ownership and management rights. Additionally, I've directed the establishment of a national fund to identify and preserve remaining heritage seed operations before more irreplaceable genetics are lost. The President continued, addressing the broader implications. What began as an investigation into predatory lending has uncovered a coordinated attempt to monopolize the genetic foundation of our food security. The natural adaptations your family, cultivated through generations of careful observation, represent a national treasure that transcends normal economic valuation. Harold studied the executive order with mixed emotions: pride in his family's contributions, grief for the heritage already lost, and determination that their preserved genetics would benefit humanity rather than enrich corporations. "Madam President," he said finally, "my grandfather's journals document correspondence with heritage seed keepers across the country. Families like ours who maintained traditional varieties through decades when agricultural policy pushed toward monoculture and standardization. Some of those lineages might still exist, even if the farms themselves have changed hands." The president nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need your help identifying potential sources. Every variety preserved represents adaptive potential we cannot afford to lose." She turned to her advisors. "I want a comprehensive national inventory of heritage agricultural genetics, prioritizing varieties with documented climate resilience. We're in a race against time as climate destabilization accelerates." As the strategy session continued, Sophia quietly led Harold to the seed vault, where government scientists were cataloging the collection using advanced imaging technology that could analyze genetic potential without damaging the seeds themselves. "Dad," she said, pointing to a digital display showing three-dimensional renderings of cellular structures, "look what they found in grandfather's survivor barley. A genetic sequence that enables roots to penetrate compacted soil under drought conditions. This adaptation doesn't exist in commercial varieties because modern agriculture relies on mechanical tilling and irrigation." Harold nodded, unsurprised. That variety came from 1950s test plots he established on the rocky hillside, the worst soil on our property. He would divert what little irrigation we had away from those plots, forcing the plants to survive on natural rainfall alone, even in drought years. Most died, but those that survived became the foundation of that seed line. "A natural stress test," Sophia marveled. "No genetic engineering, no laboratories, just patient observation and selective preservation over decades. Your grandfather called it farming for the bad years," Harold explained. "He said anyone could grow crops when conditions were ideal. The true test was developing varieties that delivered when nature turned hostile." The wisdom of that approach was now validated by advanced scientific analysis. The winter's seed collection represented a living library of climate adaptations developed through generations of careful selection that modern technology could identify but had largely failed to replicate. By evening, the preliminary national inventory had identified 43 remaining heritage seed operations nationwide that potentially contained unique genetic adaptations. Most were, like the Winters Farm, struggling financially against economic systems that recognized only standardized commercial value. President Casworth authorized immediate protective orders for all identified properties, along with emergency financial support to prevent any further loss of agricultural genetic heritage. Teams of agricultural historians began combing property records to identify farms that had maintained heritage breeding programs before being acquired by corporate interests, hoping to recover varieties that might still exist in unplanted storage, or volunteer plants persisting on converted lands. This is rapidly becoming the largest agricultural preservation initiative in history, Dr. Martinez noted as they reviewed the expanding operation from the farmhouse command center. All because an elderly farmer refused to surrender his family legacy despite seemingly insurmountable financial pressure. "We were fortunate," Harold acknowledged. "If our bank appointment had been scheduled a week later, or if your analysts hadn't flagged our property in time, everything here would have been lost." The sobering reality of how closely they had come to losing invaluable agricultural heritage hung heavily in the room. For every Winters farm identified and protected, how many similar collections had already been lost to development, foreclosure, or simple abandonment as family farming became economically unsustainable? As midnight approached, Harold sat alone on the porch, reflecting on the extraordinary developments of the past 3 days. The farm that had seemed worthless to financial institutions now hosted round-the-clock security, protecting what the president had declared strategic national resources essential to future food security. A gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. "May I join you?" President Casworth asked, having stepped away from the ongoing strategy session inside. Harold nodded, gesturing to the adjacent rocking chair where generations of his family had watched sunsets over their fields. The president settled into it with a weary sigh, momentarily just another human being carrying impossible responsibilities rather than the most powerful leader in the world. "Mr. Winters," she began after a comfortable silence, "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing what your family preserved. How many other essential resources have we already lost without recognizing their value until too late?" Harold considered this thoughtfully. "My grandfather used to say that wisdom often looks like foolishness until circumstances change enough to reveal its value. For decades, our preservation work seemed economically irrational compared to adopting commercial varieties and industrial methods. Yet you persisted," the president observed. "We knew something valuable would be lost if we surrendered to pure economic calculation," Harold replied. "Not just seeds, but knowledge, the embedded wisdom of generations, observing how plants adapt to specific places, the subtle relationships between soil, climate, and genetics that can't be reduced to standardized formulas." The president nodded, her gaze traveling across the darkened fields, now illuminated by security floodlights. "Modern systems excel at measuring immediate value, but often fail to recognize resilience value, the capacity to survive unexpected disruption. What appears inefficient in stable times becomes essential during crisis. Like keeping seed varieties that yield less in good years but survive bad ones," Harold suggested. "Exactly," the president agreed. "Society has systematically eliminated seemingly inefficient redundancies in our food system, creating brittle networks that maximize productivity under ideal conditions but lack adaptive capacity when conditions deteriorate." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Martinez, who approached with urgent news. "Madam President, we've received confirmation that Carson Development Leadership had direct communication with foreign entities specifically focused on acquiring climate-adaptive agricultural genetics. This has officially become an international security concern." The president stood, professional responsibility immediately replacing the brief moment of reflective calm. "I'll need to brief the National Security Council immediately. Mr. Winters, tomorrow we'll begin implementing the Comprehensive Protection Program for heritage seed resources nationwide. Your experience will be invaluable in helping us identify and preserve what remains." As government activity continued through the night, Harold finally retired to his bedroom, the same room where he had been born 73 years earlier. On his dresser sat the framed photograph of 4 generations of Winters farmers, taken when Harold's grandson had visited from college 3 years earlier. The image captured an unbroken lineage of agricultural stewardship that had nearly ended, with foreclosure notices and bulldozers. Instead, it would now continue with renewed purpose and recognition, the family's patient preservation work finally understood as visionary rather than outdated. What Harold Winters couldn't fully appreciate as he drifted towards sleep was how, significantly, the events unfolding around his humble farm would reshape agricultural policy worldwide. The elderly farmer who had been denied a bank loan would soon become the cornerstone of a fundamental reconsideration of agricultural value, one that recognized genetic diversity and climate resilience as essential security resources rather than inefficient economic anomalies. The president's motorcade, arriving at precisely the critical moment, had not only saved a single farm, but launched a national awakening to the true value of agricultural heritage that had been systematically undervalued by markets focused solely on short-term productivity. The seed varieties preserved through generations of careful stewardship would soon be recognized as irreplaceable national treasures, living libraries of adaptation developed through centuries of human cooperation. With natural selection, as security teams maintained vigilant protection around the Winters farm and its precious genetic legacy, the quiet revolution launched by an elderly farmer's stubborn preservation of family heritage was just beginning to reveal its true significance for humanity's food future in an increasingly unstable world. 5 years had passed since the president's motorcade arrived at Winters Heritage Farm on that pivotal day when Harold had been denied a simple bank loan. The modest family property had transformed into the administrative headquarters of the National Agricultural Genetic Heritage Program, its once struggling fields now serving as living laboratories where scientists and traditional farmers worked side by side to preserve and expand humanity's agricultural resilience. Harold, now 78, stood beneath the soaring glass dome of the newly completed Winter Seed Conservatory, where the morning sunlight illuminated thousands of carefully preserved seed varieties displayed in a spiraling exhibition that traced agricultural adaptation through human history. Visitors from around the world moved slowly through the space, many agricultural students seeing for the first time the living heritage their industrial education had never mentioned. "Grandfather would have loved this," observed Sophia, who had become the program's director of traditional knowledge integration after completing her doctorate, combining genetic science with traditional agricultural practices. All those years, he insisted on maintaining varieties that seemed commercially impractical. He was preserving the future while everyone thought he was clinging to the past. Harold nodded, watching a group of international agricultural ministers receive guided explanations of the seed preservation techniques his family had developed across 5 generations. He always said we weren't just growing crops, we were growing possibilities. Each seed variety represented a different potential future, adapting to conditions we couldn't yet imagine. The wisdom of that perspective had been dramatically validated in the 5 years since Operation Seed Trust began. As climate disruption accelerated beyond even pessimistic scientific projections, the heritage varieties, preserved by stubborn farmers like Harold, had become the foundation for agricultural adaptation worldwide. The Winters drought-hardy red wheat, once dismissed as an inefficient heirloom curiosity, now provided the genetic foundation for drought-resistant varieties being planted across 5 continents. More importantly, the open-source approach established by the national program ensured these critical adaptations remained publicly accessible rather than locked behind corporate patents. Dr. Martinez appeared, tablet in hand, her initial emergency assignment having evolved into permanent leadership of the Climate Resilience Agency. "Harold, the President will be arriving in 20 minutes for the 5th anniversary commemoration. The cabinet meeting will be held in the Heritage Conference room immediately afterward." Harold still found it surreal that cabinet-level government meetings regularly occurred in what had once been his equipment barn, now transformed into a state-of-the-art facility where agricultural policy was developed through unprecedented collaboration between traditional knowledge holders and scientific researchers. "The international delegation has some significant announcements planned for today," Dr. Martinez continued. 37 nations have now committed to the Heritage Seed Accord, establishing protected status for traditional breeding operations and creating shared access to climate-adaptive genetics. This development represented a profound shift in how nations approached agricultural sovereignty. The corporate model of proprietary genetics and patent-protected varieties was giving way to a collaborative framework that recognized climate adaptation as a shared human challenge transcending national boundaries and commercial interests. Harold made his way toward the original farmhouse, preserved exactly as it had been when the president's motorcade first arrived. The modest building served as a powerful symbol within the sprawling complex that had grown around it, a reminder that humanity's most valuable agricultural innovations often emerged not from high-tech laboratories, but from generations of careful observation by those with dirt under their fingernails. The Heritage Cafe adjoining the farmhouse had become a gathering place where scientists and traditional farmers shared meals and knowledge, breaking down the artificial barriers that had long separated practical experience from academic research. Today, it bustled with international visitors, agricultural ministers conversing with indigenous seed keepers, university researchers learning from elderly farmers whose methods had been dismissed as outdated just years earlier. Harold paused at a wall displaying photographs of the 47 heritage seed farms, now protected under the national program. Each represented a unique lineage of agricultural adaptation that had nearly been lost to economic pressures and corporate acquisition. The diversified foundation of food security that industrial agriculture had systematically narrowed in pursuit of standardization and short-term yield maximization. "There you are," called a familiar voice. William Hargrove, the 82-year-old heritage corn breeder from Iowa, whose farm had been within days of foreclosure when Operation Seed Trust identified his irreplaceable genetics, approached with the energy of a man half his age. "The corn trials are showing extraordinary results. Your grandfather's drought adaptation techniques, combined with my family's early maturation selections, have created something revolutionary." The collaboration between previously isolated heritage breeders had unleashed innovation that neither corporate research nor academic science had achieved alone. By connecting traditional knowledge systems that had developed in separate regions, the program had catalyzed agricultural breakthroughs precisely when climate destabilization made them most essential. As Harold and William discussed their ongoing breeding projects, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors announced the president's arrival. Though no longer a surprising occurrence at the farm, presidential visits still carried special significance, particularly on this fifth anniversary of the program that had fundamentally reshaped agricultural policy. President Casworth, now in her second term and widely credited with establishing agricultural resilience as a cornerstone of national security, greeted Harold with genuine warmth. Despite the demands of office, she had maintained direct involvement with the Agricultural Heritage Program, recognizing its critical importance for food security in increasingly unpredictable growing conditions. "Harold," she said, clasping his weathered hand in both of hers, "5 years ago today, you showed us what we almost lost through our failure to value traditional agricultural wisdom. Today, we celebrate not just what was saved, but what has been created through the reconnection of knowledge systems that should never have been separated." The commemoration ceremony took place in the central courtyard where Harold's family had once dried herbs and shucked corn. Now surrounded by research facilities and seed preservation vaults, the space maintained its connection to practical agricultural tradition, the foundation upon which scientific innovation could build meaningful resilience. Distinguished guests from around the world gathered to mark the program's achievements, the successful preservation of over 4,800 unique heritage varieties that had faced extinction. The development of regional agricultural adaptation strategies based on traditional knowledge, and perhaps most significantly, the emergence of a new agricultural paradigm that valued resilience and diversity alongside productivity. The president spoke with characteristic directness about the program's significance. 5 years ago, our agricultural system stood at a crossroads. Down one path lay increasing consolidation, genetic narrowing, and vulnerability disguised as efficiency. Down the other, the path illuminated by farmers like Harold Winters, lay the preservation of agricultural possibilities, the diverse genetic foundation necessary for adaptation to conditions we cannot precisely predict. She continued, gesturing toward the heritage seed farms displayed on surrounding screens. We nearly made the catastrophic error of eliminating the very adaptations humanity would need for an unstable climate future. Market systems failed to value resilience until crisis made its worth undeniable. What began with an elderly farmer denied a simple bank loan has evolved into a fundamental reconsideration of what constitutes agricultural value. The international achievements announced that day underscored the global significance of what had begun at Winter's farm. Perhaps most remarkably, Carson Development's massive seed vault network, built to monopolize climate-adaptive genetics, had been repurposed as the foundation of a distributed global system, ensuring no single catastrophe could eliminate humanity's agricultural heritage. The corporate attempt to control adaptation had instead catalyzed unprecedented international cooperation to preserve it as a shared resource. As formal ceremonies concluded, Harold slipped away from the diplomatic proceedings to visit a special section of the farm rarely seen by visitors. Behind the original seed storage facility his grandfather had built, a simple garden contained plants representing 5 generations of Winter's family breeding work, living embodiments of accumulated knowledge that had nearly vanished beneath. Developers' bulldozers. Dr. Kaplan found him there, kneeling to examine the distinctive seed heads of his grandfather's first experimental wheat crosses from the 1930s. The genetic sequencing on your grandfather's early drought experiments is complete, she reported. His intuitive selection process somehow identified adaptive traits that our most advanced technology is only beginning to understand. Without fancy equipment or corporate funding, he recognized patterns that still challenge our scientific frameworks. Harold nodded, unsurprised. He always said plants would tell you what they needed if you watched closely enough. Modern agriculture became so focused on controlling growing conditions that it stopped paying attention to how plants naturally adapt when conditions can't be controlled. This fundamental insight, that adaptation, emerges from relationship rather than domination, had become the philosophical foundation of the new agricultural paradigm emerging from the Heritage Program. Rather than forcing standardized crops to grow through increasingly intensive inputs and interventions, the focus shifted to developing varieties in cooperative relationship with specific growing conditions. As afternoon sunlight illuminated the experimental garden, Harold reflected on the extraordinary journey from crisis to transformation. The farm that had stood days away from foreclosure and development now served as the administrative center for a global movement reconnecting humanity with its agricultural heritage. The seed varieties nearly lost to economic valuation systems that recognized only standard commercial metrics now anchored food security strategies on every continent. What had begun with the humiliation of loan denial, followed by the shock of a presidential motorcade, had evolved into something far more profound, a fundamental reconsideration of agricultural wisdom and value that transcended normal political and economic boundaries. Later that evening, after the dignitaries departed and the farmhouse quieted, Harold sat with Sophia and his 18-year-old grandson Michael on the same porch where 5 generations of Winters farmers had contemplated their fields. Michael, now studying agricultural genetics while maintaining deep involvement with the practical breeding work of the Heritage Program, represented the perfect integration of traditional knowledge and modern science that had become the hallmark of the new approach. "Grandpa," Michael asked, reviewing data on his tablet from their latest wheat trials, "why do you think it took a crisis for people to recognize the value of what our family preserved?" The evidence was there all along that genetic diversity would be crucial for climate adaptation. Harold considered this thoughtfully. Human systems struggle to value what they haven't yet needed. Your great-grandfather used to say that true foresight often appears indistinguishable from foolish stubbornness until circumstances change enough to reveal its wisdom. Sophia added, "Institutional systems optimized for predictable conditions inevitably undervalue adaptations to conditions they haven't experienced. Financial markets couldn't price climate resilience until instability made its worth undeniable." The conversation paused as they watched the sun setting over experimental fields where scientists and traditional farmers worked side by side, combining centuries of observational wisdom with advanced analytical tools. The artificial boundaries that had separated these knowledge systems were dissolving, revealing them as complementary approaches to the same fundamental challenge: cultivating life in harmony with ever-changing conditions. The real tragedy, Harold reflected, isn't that we almost lost this farm. It's how many similar knowledge treasures were lost before anyone recognized their value. How many family seed collections were discarded when farms failed. How many adaptive varieties developed through generations of careful observation disappeared beneath subdivisions and shopping centers. This sobering reality had driven the Heritage Program's urgency, the recognition that each lost variety represented not merely a plant, but an irreplaceable adaptive pathway developed through centuries of relationship between human stewardship and natural selection. Every bankruptcy auction that dispersed a heritage seed collection, every foreclosure that converted specialized growing operations to standardized commercial use, eliminated possibilities humanity might desperately need in an increasingly unpredictable climate future. Yet the program's achievements over 5 years demonstrated that recognition, even belated, could catalyze extraordinary preservation and innovation. The agricultural paradigm shift launched from Winters Farm had spread globally with remarkable speed, transcending normal institutional resistance to fundamental change. Perhaps because food security touches such basic human needs, the necessity for resilience had overcome traditional political and economic divisions. As darkness settled over the farm, lights illuminated the research facilities and seed vaults that now surrounded the original farmhouse. Security remained tight. The heritage genetics preserved here still represented irreplaceable resources that could determine food security in an unstable future. But the atmosphere had transformed. From emergency response to purposeful mission. Tomorrow, the Indonesian delegation wants to discuss integrating their traditional drought cycling techniques with our rainfall pattern mapping, Michael noted, reviewing the next day's schedule. Their island farming communities have been adapting to irregular monsoon patterns for centuries. The adaptive strategies they've developed could be crucial as similar disruptions spread to continental growing regions. This exchange exemplified the Heritage Program's core philosophy, that humanity's best hope for agricultural resilience lay not in centralized technological solutions, but in connecting diverse knowledge systems developed through generations of careful observation in specific places. The program had established formal frameworks valuing traditional agricultural knowledge as equal to academic science, creating unprecedented collaboration between knowledge holders previously separated by artificial hierarchies. As they prepared to retire for the night, Harold took a final walk to the hill crest overlooking the property. The modest farm that had nearly vanished beneath commercial development had become the nucleus of a profound transformation in how humanity approached its relationship with food and the living systems that produce it. The elderly farmer denied a bank loan that Pivotal Morning now regularly advised presidents and prime ministers on agricultural resilience strategies for an uncertain climate future. Most significantly, the wisdom his family had preserved when it seemed economically irrational, maintaining diverse seed varieties, breeding for resilience rather than uniformity, preserving adaptation to conditions rather than attempting to standardize conditions themselves, had been validated not as outdated tradition but as essential foresight. What financial institutions had deemed worthless and developers had valued only for underlying land had proven to be perhaps the most valuable agricultural resource of the coming century, the genetic foundation for adaptation to conditions that standardized industrial varieties could not survive. As Harold gazed across the darkened fields where security patrols now protected seeds once deemed commercially worthless, he reflected on the extraordinary journey from crisis to transformation. The president's motorcade, arriving at precisely the critical moment 5 years earlier, had not only saved his family's heritage, but launched a fundamental reconsideration of agricultural value with implications for humanity's shared future. The elderly farmer, who had walked into a bank defeated and emerged to find the president's motorcade on his property, had become the catalyst for a new agricultural wisdom that recognized diversity and adaptation as essential rather than inefficient. His family's century of careful stewardship, preserved against all economic logic, now served as the foundation for food security in an increasingly unpredictable world, proving that the most valuable innovation often emerges not from disrupting tradition, but from preserving it until changing conditions reveal its hidden wisdom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.